Started. Welcome to the Clinical Trials Community of Practice, everyone. Today, we are fortunate to have an excellent topic that will be of value to everyone, which is the Emergency Department Research Coordinator Program. I'm going to turn it over to our speakers who will introduce themselves. And thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Safdar. We're really pleased to be here today, and we're going to talk in depth about how research happens in the emergency department. I'm sure everyone on the call can anticipate that studying critical illness and injury presents significant challenges. And of course, that's due in large part to the manner in which emergencies like stroke or overdose or cardiac arrest unfold. But there are so many patients who come to the ED for less acute concerns, but their treatment rate is going to be managed in concert with the leveled traumas and the other extremely time-sensitive medical emergencies where every second matters. So what we hope is that by the end of the presentation today, you're going to understand so much more about how our research program operates in the unique environment that is the ED. So before we get into the nitty-gritty of our content, sorry, just figuring out which of my buttons will work here. So we'll start by introducing ourselves. I'm Phoebe Natzke. I'm the Research Services Manager in the Department of Emergency Medicine. I have a background in translational research, and I've worked at UW for over 10 years. In my current role, I broadly support the implementation of research activities in our department. So those research activities range from retrospective chart review all the way through clinical trials with complex prospective enrollment. I also support with budget and contracting. I support regulatory and compliance activities, and I'm involved in departmental mentoring, research mentoring, and training opportunities. Excuse me. Jenny Matthews will be our next presenter. Jenny has been a research coordinator with the Department of Emergency Medicine for 2 years. Prior to that, she worked clinically in the emergency department and across other healthcare settings. Next up, we'll hear from Lex Oliver, and she's the lead for our research coordinator program. Lex has been with the program for 4 years, and before coming to emergency medicine, she worked in immunology research. And our last presenter on the call today is Helena Ikenberry. So she'll wrap things up for us today, and she has been a research coordinator with our program for about a year. And before joining our team, she worked for 4 years as an undergraduate research assistant in a research program that investigates infectious diseases that can and do present in emergency care. So here's a little overview for our topics in our presentation today. We're going to share deeply about the research program that we operate in the emergency departments, both at University Hospital and at East Madison Hospital. We think that before we get into the details, it'll be really useful to kind of set a foundation for talking more specifically about managing research in emergency medicine. So we're going to start with kind of a more general introduction to what that looks like at our institution specifically. So we will start here with a quote from Dr. Shaw. So, excuse me, this is our department chair, Dr. Manish Shaw, and what he says is that emergency care research informs and improves diagnostic approaches and treatments that save lives across the continuum of care. There was never a question of if we needed to drive research in our emergency departments. It was a matter of building and scaling an effective, high-quality program fast enough to meet the critical demand. So research in emergency medicine is really essential to advancing clinical practice in this high stakes and complex area of medicine. And again, I don't think it's surprising for anyone on the call to hear or be reminded that the ED is the entry point for patients who are experiencing acute medical or surgical or psychiatric conditions. And we have to perform research right in the emergency department in order to improve interventions for those types of illnesses or injury. And it's just not possible to capture those data or those outcomes in any other care environment. So the ED is where the vast majority of hospital admissions initiate as well. And so we have to also consider that the experience and what happens in the emergency department will really shape the rest of the diagnostic and therapeutic trajectory for each patient who is admitted. And that's really where Dr. Shaw's comments about the continuum of care are really relevant and really key. So additionally, the emergency department plays this central role in public health research. So that involves investigations about substance use and abuse, injury prevention, and emerging infectious diseases. And just a couple other notes here about the emergency department and kind of how that clinical environment is changing and has been changing for about a decade, maybe a little more. But our clinical volumes are consistently rising, and that's in part because the ED serves as this safety net for populations of folks who may not have other sources of healthcare. And so the ED can actually, and does actually, for many folks, serve as their only source of healthcare. So that means that we have this high volume of acute visits, but we also have these visits that are less acute, um, just not high acuity. But when we think about populations using the emergency department as their primary source of healthcare, we also recognize and remember that a lot of folks belonging to those populations are underrepresented in medical research more broadly. So ultimately, discoveries that are made in emergency care settings do inform national guidelines, they improve diagnostic accuracy, and they improve care across other healthcare settings. Okay, so I just have to tell you all that we do not ever lose an opportunity to share pictures of our med flight helicopters. So we want to mention that we have at UW this extremely robust research enterprise in emergency medicine, and our research activities do span, so all the way from pre-hospital emergency services through critical care medicine. So like I said, we have this, we're just showing off here that we have helicopters, and then the image on the other half of the screen is an image taken directly from the emergency department at University Hospital. Okay, so I think we're going to do a quick poll here. So get ready to drop a number right in the chat. And I'm not sure I can see the chat. So let me ask if someone else can share out some of the numbers. But we'd like to know, how many visits do you think, how many clinical encounters in the emergency department happened at University Hospital in the year 2025? Okay, so I'm sure there are a wide array of guesses, but I will tell you that it was about 75,000 adult and pediatric patients who were seen and cared for at the UH-ED last year. So we do have a pediatric ED at University Hospital, so we do provide expert care to children and teens as well as adults. Between University Hospital and East Madison Hospital, it was about 114,000 clinical encounters. And when you add in care partners and family members, it means that our research program has access to about 250,000 people per year. All right, so let's get into the heart of how this research happens and how we do different types of activities in the emergency care setting. So we operate a research program called the Emergency Department Research Coordinator Program. And moving forward, we're all just going to refer to it as the EDRC program. So this is a centralized set of research services launched in 2016. And really, the program exists so that we can safely conduct research in emergency care and support research access for collaborators across the institution. So the program is staffed by clinical research coordinators and research nurses, and these folks are specifically and intensively trained to perform different types of research activities in the course of clinical care for patients. We have to date, so in just about 10 years' time, the program has enrolled more than 11,500 participants into 45 unique federal foundation and industry sponsored projects. So we're extremely proud of our track record. And we like to tell people that we've done so much in just about 10 years' time. We did expand our program services to East Madison Hospital last year, so right after 4th of July. And it was our group who performed the first enrollments of patients into clinical trials at East Madison Hospital. And that's just another thing that we're just proud to share. Okay, so our program is supported by this really robust leadership structure. And a few slides ago, you heard a quote from Dr. Shaw, who's over here on the left. So Dr. Shaw is our departmental chair. And a fun fact we like to share is he was actually a research coordinator in the emergency department at the University of Rochester when he was a first-year medical student. And we had asked him for a picture of himself from his medical school days, and he absolutely declined to provide that image to us. But I think we're allowed to share that he said he had so much more hair at that time. So just really, really strong support from departmental leaders. I'll just kind of briefly indicate who these folks are. So Dr. Shaw, of course, Dr. Gilmore-Bukowski is the vice chair of research in our department. Dr. Puglia is the director of clinical research. Our program has its own medical director, and that's Dr. Jesus Trevino. And then you'll see me over there on the right. Next up, I'm happy to share faces and names for our current team. So we have 3 research coordinators, and actually it's 4. We have 1 new team member starting up next week. And then we also have 4 research nurses. So for about 8 years of the program's existence, the program was supported entirely by clinical research coordinators. But in 2023, we were able to bring research nurses to the staff, which really allowed expansion of our program services. And all of our research nurses do work clinically in the ED as bedside nurses. So they have this expertise and this savvy for the emergency department environment that's just really unparalleled. Okay, so what does it look like to actually take this team, these faces, and put them into that environment and have research happen? So I'm going to give you just one more quote to kind of preview what we'll talk about in terms of that integration in the environment. This is Dr. Trevino. He's the medical director of our program. And what he says is that working directly with care team members within the ED allows research staff to respond with the same urgency as their clinical partners and to plan participant interactions strategically without jeopardizing patient care. So we're going to really explain to you more about what this can look like, but our hope collectively is that all of you have avoided the emergency department and have not had any of your own personal illness or injury that would have brought you to this place. And so hoping that everyone is not familiar with the environment, we're just going to kind of talk through some of the complexities or what it might look like to have an encounter here. So this box shows you like these are things that will happen in the emergency department, but we have to start over here, and I'm hoping you can all see my mouse moving. But we start with how you get here. So a patient will arrive via emergency medical services. So that's paramedics arrive in an ambulance, or folks will walk in, be brought by a family member, etc. And so if you, let's imagine for an unfortunate moment that you've been involved in a nasty motor vehicle accident and require immediate resuscitation. That happens, right? You go immediately to a resus bay and you receive that immediate life-saving treatment. For everyone else, you're going to work through a triage process. So this is where a triage physician will hear your story. Triage nurses might take your vitals. And then there's this initial assessment and initial treatment. So maybe pain relief or fluids. And then a patient will move through the rest of their course in the ED. So that might include bedside diagnostics or labs. That might mean being sent for imaging. That might mean being prescribed a medication and then some monitoring, and then maybe you get sent back to imaging. So we have these different care spaces for different types of acuity or different types of care being provided. And so we were really just trying to kind of demonstrate here that patients are constantly moving to different geographic areas. And each patient will move several times as their care progresses. And so when we have to integrate research activities into the context of the ED encounter, we're also considering this geographic movement that happens. So this requires that really, really close coordination with the care team. And because the clinical volumes are so extremely high, we have to maintain this absolute commitment to not delaying discharge for any research purposes. So there's just this need for the clinical staff and the research staff to work together. And all of these research activities are just completely and entirely embedded into the course of care. So I'm hoping or wondering if people are thinking like, how could that possibly happen? How could you do that? It sounds very chaotic. So let's talk about how it happens. We do it really well. The first thing that makes it possible is just a tremendous amount of departmental support. So, of course, research can never interfere with clinical care, but the research mission is a known priority across the departments. And to support that priority, ED clinical staff receive very many updates and really a lot of communication about ongoing or future research activities. And they're also provided opportunities to provide feedback, to help with workflow refinements. We really solicit and invite the clinical staff to share with us about like, well, what's going to work, what's not going to work, how can we partner with you so that this is feasible? So we maintain and nurture these relationships with clinical staff to just the utmost extent. So when we think about the clinical staff, we're thinking about techs, nurses, advanced practice providers, and then residents and attending physicians. So we also really think about training in some specific and intentional ways. So the team, the research team, has to have really expert knowledge of the space and then really extensive training about scenarios that are completely unique to the emergency department. So that might include understanding about how events would be sequenced or might happen in a resuscitation bay for one of those like life-saving moments of care. So it takes about 3 months of full-time intensive training to independently manage some of the activities in our portfolio, and it takes about 6 months before one of our research team members can be fully independent to support the larger portfolio of studies and trials. Okay, so I just want to check about any questions at this point before we move on to our next section. I'm hoping someone will chime in if there are questions in the chat that I just can't see. All right, well, I will hand the mic over to Jenny Matthews. Jenny, who I introduced earlier, is a current research coordinator on our team, and Jenny will share about EDRC program services and collaborations.
Thank you, Phoebe, and hello, everybody. You just heard from Phoebe about research in the emergency department and a little about our program. So now I'm going to give you some specifics on our services and who we collaborate with. So, as this slide says, what do we do? Well, the program truly provides a comprehensive set of services and support. These services, of course, include patient screening, enrollment, and informed consent. We also do data collection, and for us, this means like administering surveys. We also do qualitative interviewing with patients, and we also collect and process samples according to protocol and UW health policy. In past studies, these samples have included blood, saliva, sputum, and even urine. We also regularly participate in trials that seek to validate devices and technologies that need a standard of care comparator. And I'll give you some examples of these kinds of trials in the next couple slides. Our team can also support protocol consultation and study planning for trials that have an emergency department component, even if they don't require EDRC program staff for the enrollment. Like Phoebe said earlier, we have worked with 45 industry partners. And at the program start, we worked mostly with Department of Emergency Medicine collaborators, or I'll probably say DEM collaborators. But over time, we have strategically increased our industry, SMPH, and outside institution collaborators. As you can see in the chart here, it's a pretty equal spread between industry, DEM, and SMPH collaborators. So now I've got another quick poll for you. How many principal investigators has the EDRC program supported? And you can put that in the chat if you like. All right. We've got some good guesses here. One of them is really close, and the answer is 39. 39 and counting, I guess I should say. So I'm going to introduce you to a few of those collaborators now. Okay, so here is Dr. Puglia. As you probably remember, he's an example of a DEM collaborator, of course. He's our director of clinical research. He runs a nationally recognized program of research in infectious disease in emergency care. One study we supported of his involved using skin temperature as an added diagnostic tool for diagnosing cellulitis in the emergency department. There's a little picture there of what we were doing. This is Dr. Darcy. She's also a DEM collaborator. She is the Associate Professor of Emergency Medicine, Neurology, and Neurosurgery, and she currently serves as Interim Director of Neurocritical Care. She directs externally funded programs of research with a number of ongoing research activities and investigations that are supported by our program. We recently recruited for the civilian wing of her study using an iStat device, which is pictured here next to her picture, which we use to identify biomarkers in patients with mild traumatic brain injury. And the overall goal of the study was to potentially rule out which patients can forgo imaging after a head injury. Now for an SMPH collaborator, this is Dr. Wald. She is the Emeritus Chair of the Department of Pediatrics and currently faculty in infectious disease. We are supporting her research identifying which rhinoviruses in children are more likely to lead to hospitalization. And then as an example of outside collaborators, this is Dr. Gindi. He has a phase 3 trial investigating a new medication, which you can see here, Fibregia, and that's intended for trauma patients requiring mass transfusion. We've also worked with some industry partners, as you can see here. I'm willing to bet many of you have either used or at least seen the Binax COVID at-home tests. These were tested in our emergency department using EDRC program to recruit test subjects. The picture in the center of the bottom row here is of some exciting software we help test. When paired with a handheld ultrasound device, it can be used to locate veins and arteries in the leg for rapid identification of deep vein thrombosis, even by people who are not trained in sonography. And that was a pretty fun one to test. So with all of these collaborations, we've been able to achieve some really strong enrollment numbers and portfolio growth. So let's take a closer look at 2025. Throughout the year, we enrolled 640 patients into these 9 studies. This graph represents the diverse nature of our portfolio. So I'll tell you a little bit about it without getting too far into the weeds on it. Say that last year we performed survey-based studies, and some examples of that are the trafficking survey all the way over on the left, RCOM, and the AI interview studies. We also perform test and device validation studies. Syneos, which is the largest bar on this graph, ThinkSono to the right of that, and Beckman were all examples of this. Some of the studies that we do are actually a mixture of survey and sample collection, like point and dysphagia on this graph. So really the takeaway is that we are prepared to execute just about any type of study that can happen in the emergency department. This slide shows the number of active studies in the EDRC portfolio across the last 8 years. This is probably a good time to share with you that the portfolio changes really rapidly. So we support some studies or trials for like just a few months, and others are more long-term. For example, I mentioned the trafficking study in the last slide. That one has been ongoing for the last 4 years and is actually now been integrated into standard of care. You can see from this slide that in any given year, we've supported at least 5 studies and up to 18. Well, now that we've heard about collaborators, I want to pause for questions. So you can either just shout them out or put them in the chat. Okay. Well, if there are no questions, I'm going to introduce our next speaker, and that is Lex Oliver. She is our ED program lead, and she's going to talk about how exactly we're able to achieve success with such a diverse research portfolio.
Thank you, Jenny. As she said, my name is Lex, and I'm going to talk to you about the logistics of managing our program portfolio. So we strive to run 5 to 8 studies at a time, which is the number we have found allows us to fully meet the unique needs of each study and still achieve high levels of fidelity. Our research team is generally staffed from 8 a.m. to 10 p.m., so we are available during those times of high patient volumes. And as a reminder, it's been said, I think, by all of our speakers so far, nothing in the ED is scheduled or planned. The studies we enroll for and the patients we talk to differ each day. And also, some studies do require follow-up via phone or for further sample collection, which we can also accommodate. So, how do we maintain the ability for our program to perform rapid research that can only take place in the ED and the high levels of coordination required between clinicians and researchers within one of the most dynamic and high-stakes areas in medicine? We have identified these 4 foundations on how to make it work. And these include infrastructure, communication practices, data-driven recruitment strategies, and access to robust resources. So this slide shows a busy image that we've created to show the different stages from study identification to maintenance through closeout. This is a tool that we use for our program as a guiding document, and this is something that we take into consideration for every day and every study. And on the left here, you'll also see the 3 components of our programmatic structure, which includes personnel, infrastructure, and fiscal. These tasks are divided between the research services manager, which is Phoebe, myself, and Audrey Wood, who is our research RN supervisor. We also utilize a variety of practices for communication within our team to ensure members are supported and aligned with up-to-date information about studies, staffing, and priorities. So to ensure quality data collection and documentation, we have processes in place that include quality assurance checks, and we have systems for screening, documentation, and enrollment based on unique study protocols. So to optimize enrollment based on clinical indicators, we actively seek opportunities to improve research pitches. To do this, we communicate regularly with our principal investigators and other clinical staff about what we are noticing and how we might adapt strategies. So one example of this, for a BNP test validation study, we noticed that when we talked to providers, they were not indicating that heart failure was their primary diagnosis. So we worked with the principal investigator, Dr. Shaw, to broaden the pitch to include heart failure anywhere within the provider's diagnosis. This small change increased the number of patients we could talk to, thereby improving our recruitment numbers. We also carefully and intentionally maintain separate types of communication on separate platforms. For rapid communication between team members, we use Microsoft Teams, WhatsApp, texting, and phone calls. But in addition, we also have more routine forms of communication, such as weekly team meetings with research staff and managers. Agendas for these typically include announcements, reminders, scheduling, kudos, missteps, and out occurrences, as well as upcoming out of offices and individual study updates. Also, at the end of every shift, EDRCs send out a shift summary email, and I'm going to show an example of that in the next slide. So in this example, you can see that Jenny, who just spoke, provided comments about what occurred during her shift, which included training one of our research nurses, Micah. It also shows that one of the tasks for enrollment was not completed because imaging results were not complete before the end of the shift. So she asked the next employee to complete that task. Then she discussed general upkeep and finally commented on each of the active studies we were recruiting for at that time, including patient approached and the outcome of those approaches. In terms of communication with study teams, as we develop a plan for a research study, we first consider the potential for success of a study in our department by performing a feasibility assessment and educating the team on the services our team provides. These are what we call our consultative conversations. Next, strategic planning and upkeep are essential components of successful study operations, requiring ongoing communication within the team and with investigators. We regularly engage with the PI or sponsor to clarify questions as they arise, like that BNP example I gave earlier. And this normally occurs especially in the beginning stages of a study rollout. Recruitment summaries are a good metric to see if we are meeting our goals. These are created by me, and they include monthly breakdown of eligible patients and recruitment outcomes, how many people agree versus decline on a study we pitch, and other useful data. These can shed light on ineligibility statistics, and they can help us strategize to improve recruitment numbers. And at the end of a study, we generate a closeout report. These reports include commentary on recruitment, study barriers, study facilitators, and our overall experience working with the team. We find that these serve as a valuable reference for study teams and for partners. Next, I will share about the third way we manage our portfolio, which is using the data to drive recruitment strategies. And we do this in a couple ways. First, in the planning stage, before any enrollment occurs, we perform feasibility assessments, which help us determine if a study protocol could be successfully implemented in the ED and if our department has the potential to produce adequate enrollment numbers. These assessments give the partner an idea of the services we are able to offer as a research program and also as a health system. A prep count is a part of the feasibility assessment, and this is performed by one of the data scientists in our department. This includes a review of the data seen over either a couple months or a couple years from the health system that can help us to make an accurate estimate for enrollment goals. And another way we use data is to ensure that we can meet the needs of the investigator on their timeline. So for an example of this, a study that we deemed was not feasible required us to enroll 10 patients on ECMO in 3 months. When we performed our prep count, the data informed us that we would not see that number of eligible patients in that time frame. So after some communication with the study team, we were able to maintain a relationship with this partner and offer our services to a future opportunity where we could support their needs. And of course, we use this data to carefully consider if any adjustments can be made to help achieve study timeline and goals when possible. So that was an example of how we use data before a study launch, but we also still use data to drive enrollment strategies even after studies are implemented. So we, within our program, consider weekly enrollment goals and weekly caps for actively enrolling studies. This is set by the EDRC team and is related to volumes seen in the ED and perceived rarity of certain enrollments. So as a team, we work to prioritize patients who are eligible for the stricter protocols with those rarer patient populations. And in addition, we always prioritize approaching and enrollment activities, saving that more like back-end work until the end of a shift to maximize our patient contact time. And as we work towards these goals, EDRC leadership maintains ongoing communication with both internal and external study teams to align expectations with our operational realities. And then finally, we have access to resources. So for each study, we create a handbook that is a breakdown of the study protocol. The handbook is created by the primary study coordinator after we get a protocol from the sponsor. It offers step-by-step guidance for enrollment of patients in individual trials, and we also use them to train other research staff in study practices. Study journals, on the other hand, are internal documents that speak to frequently asked questions. All of our study staff can edit and maintain them throughout the duration of a study. If a problem arises, we discuss it as a team, and then we put the question and answer in the journal so people can refer back to it easily. One of the tools that we use to screen for patients in the ED is a BPA, also known as a best practice alert. These are notifications set up by the EPIC staff, which are sent to our HealthLink inboxes. We work with them to develop codes that identify eligible patients based on inclusion criteria for individual studies. And we try to keep the criteria broad and then screen each patient closely still. So one example of this, our traumatic brain injury study, Point TBI, has a BPA. We set the conditions for this to alert if a patient is in the ED and if they get a head CT. So pretty minor inclusion criteria there, because experience has taught us that keeping the BPA criteria minimal and then manually screening for other exclusions is the most efficient. A BPA with a lot of ineligibility criteria built in and very specific standards for alerting will lead to potentially eligible participants being missed. Our department also has a very unique resource. This is the Emergency Medicine Research Committee, which consists of research faculty and staff who meet bi-monthly to review and discuss all proposed studies. Members offer valuable insights regarding feasibility, logistics, nursing involvement, data collection and storage, and ethics prior to submission to UROC and the IRB. And then in terms of document maintenance and retention, we utilize tools such as e-binders and physical storage to maintain items we receive from the sponsors, which can include protocol documents, regulatory files, and other materials. I see a question in the chat, but I'll get to that at the end of my slide here. So up next, we have an example of the handbook I mentioned in the last slide. The design of our handbooks are broken down into 3 sections. This includes action, description, and relevant notes. The description is the information pulled from the study protocol, while relevant notes is more the layman's terms. So in this example, I highlighted the blood draw, where the staff can quickly reference how much blood they are collecting, in which tubes, and other useful information, like whether a waste is required prior to collection. And then I've also highlighted the survey collection. Here I added information on who needs to answer the survey questions and who is signing the forms. And this layout is very useful for training new staff, but is also very helpful for senior staff to reference. So when you're managing multiple studies like we do in our portfolio, it is so important to have all the steps in one place to make sure we are always adhering to study protocol.
Lex, I'm going to chime in because I see the question in the chat from Dr. Safdar. And I think that if any of the folks on the call today are interested in seeing a full study handbook, they could let us know. And we'll ask one of our internal faculty if they feel comfortable that we share out a handbook from one of their studies. I think seeing the full document is valuable, so we will follow up about that.
But yeah, so that's how we manage our program portfolio. So I would like to pause to see if we have any other questions before we move on.
So Kelly Miller asks, what % of approached participants will participate in a trial? It tends to likely be a high stress situation. So are most participants friendly or enthusiastic about participating when approached? And I'm wondering, Lex or Jenny, do you want to respond?
Yeah, I'll take that. I think the percentage that agree definitely varies from study to study. If it's something very short and easy, like a survey, I would say we get around like 70% to agree. Most people are, just if it's 2 minutes of their time, they're super willing to be engaged in research. Some of the more lengthier protocols and ones that require follow-up, I still think our team does a pretty good job with those rates. I would say they fall a little shorter, maybe closer to like 60%. Jenny or Helena, if you want to chime in to include your opinions on that. But otherwise, people, even in these high stress environments, are still super willing to participate. I think our team also, part of our training is talking about the best times to approach patients. I always, when I'm training new staff, say, I should never be the first face a patient is seeing in their emergency department stay. I don't have the answers to their questions. They're here for a reason. Like, I need to wait until they're more settled, until they've had conversations with their provider. And usually we try to approach when they have some downtime. Maybe they're waiting on their scans to come back before we talk to them. So we get people when they're bored a lot, so they're willing to participate.
Yeah, I'll emphasize that just to another degree. So I came to emergency medicine from the Wasteman Center, actually, and it was a real learning curve for me to understand just exactly how much waiting there is in the emergency department. So it's not like Grey's Anatomy. It's not like the pit. It takes a long time for labs and for imaging to result. So there's a lot of waiting. And our team does such a nice job of just showing up in a very calm and compassionate manner. And a lot of times patients and their families are very willing to be distracted, I would say. We obviously have a university community here, so many patients have a connection to the university. They'll say like, oh, my aunt's a professor over in soil science or something. And so that can generate just a lot of conversations that help pass the time. Our team does a nice job of really explaining, like, this is why we think the science is so important. And, this is what the opportunity to contribute looks like. And of course, it's just a take it or leave it kind of thing. We see many patients who are not in a position to be able to even think about participating in research. And of course, that's fine. And we support those patients as best we can, whether it's just grabbing an extra blanket or a glass of water. But it's truly remarkable how many patients are interested and willing, and just really a nice number of conversations every single day. Okay, I think we're gonna pass to Helena. I think we'll come back to Amy and Shannon's questions in just a few minutes, if that's okay. All right, Lex, you want to pass off to Helena?
Yes. So Helena Ikenberry, one of our research coordinators, she is going to take you through a case study of a trial that our program very successfully completed.
Thank you, Lex, and hi, everyone. Throughout this presentation, we have gone over what we do and how we do it, but now I'm going to walk you through a real-life example of a successful trial that our team supported, which was trope sensor. For this study, the PI was Dr. Brian Patterson. Not only is he DEM faculty, but he is also the Physician Administrative Director for Clinical AI and the Medical Informatics Director for the Predictive Analytics and Clinical Decision Support for UW Health. Woo, I'm out of breath. He is very impressive. RCE Technologies, Inc. was our industry partner, and this study aimed to validate a new non-invasive device for detecting troponin, which is a biomarker for cardiac strain. For this study, we recruited people who were in the emergency department with elevated troponin levels and also healthy volunteers from the community with no history of cardiac events in order to validate this device. And there were different inclusion and exclusion criteria for both of these groups. To participate, volunteers wore this lovely device on their wrists for 3 minutes, and then we drew 18 milliliters of blood in order to compare troponin results. This study competitively enrolled at 10 different sites over a 7-month period, which is a slightly shorter timeline for us. And to enroll healthy individuals, we partnered with community members and patients in the emergency department. And a little fun fact, Jenny, who you heard from earlier, actually participated in this trial as a community member a year before she even joined our team, which is super fun. And then as you can see from the graph, we were the highest enrolling site for this study. This study was important for our program in many ways. For one, we found that while working in this competitive enrollment trial with a shorter time frame, if we adapted our schedule to allow for overlapping staff, then we can more easily focus on trope sensor recruiting goals. So our usual practice is that we schedule 1 to 2 research staff per day with little to no overlap. But by scheduling multiple research staff to work a full 8-hour shift together, we can maximize enrollment for this study. This was also our program's first study that recruited healthy volunteers in the community, which opened up a new patient population for us. And it led us to hire our first 2 research nurses who have been an incredible addition to the team. Additionally, we were excited to engage in continued work with this industry partner, including consulting on the device design. So one example of this was that the original device utilized cellular signal to upload the readings. But what we found early on was that there were many spots in the emergency department with unreliable cellular signal. So in some rooms, we were taking the reading and then trying to sprint to a whole other part of the emergency department to try and upload the images, which was sometimes doable, but definitely not the most glamorous. And even when we did try and find a good area for signal, sometimes the device wouldn't upload the readings at all because we didn't make it in time, which could lead to incomplete enrollments or us having to try again. So since we had a good relationship with the sponsor, we were able to bring these observations to them and they listened. And so for the next iteration of their design, they made it so that you could have the participant wear the device in one area, and then it gave us plenty of time to move the device to an area with better cellular service in order to do the uploads. Lastly, this study ultimately offered an opportunity for a long-term partnership as we were invited back to enroll for the 2.0 version of this study, which we actually just started recruiting for last week. And here is a completely not staged photo of me and Natasha, one of our research RNs, doing the training for that. So before we wrap up, we are going to do one more fun poll. So the EDRC program supports work that can also ultimately result in scholarly product. So my question for you all is, how many publications do you think have resulted from EDRC research efforts? And once again, you can throw those in the chat. Okay, Cecilia is confident in us. These are great answers. Well, the answer is that it's over 50 publications that have resulted from our research efforts. And it has been extremely rewarding to see how our work in the emergency department can ultimately influence the future of healthcare. And then to wrap things up, if you liked what you heard today, you should partner with us. If you feel like your area of research could benefit from data collection in the emergency department environment, we would absolutely love to chat with you. You can do so by reaching out to Phoebe Natzke, as you're happy to schedule consultative conversations or even go over quoting. And then if you would like to learn more about our program, you can always visit our website through the QR code included on this slide. Okay, thank you so much for listening to our presentation, everyone. We really appreciate it. We hope you enjoyed it, hopefully learned something from it, and we'll take some final questions.
Thank you so much. People can feel free to get themselves off mute and ask or put it in the chat.
I'll run us back to a couple of questions from Amy and Shannon, who asked earlier. So Amy asked, do you happen to know what % of your studies meet the established enrollment goal? So I think I have 2 responses to that. The first is that when we partner with industry studies, we're most often one of 5 to 10 sites, and it's a competitive enrollment situation. So we set some internal goals around maybe number of completed enrollments per week or per month. But in those situations, we don't have control over how well the other sites are performing, or, there have been situations where a sponsor conducted an interim analysis and then canceled all recruitment at a moment's notice. So in those situations, we just do the best we can and we have less control. When we're working with internal partners, we really, in our consultative conversations and our initial feasibility assessments, we really get pretty vigorous about what can we realistically do. So we look at seasonal trends and work with our analysts to really develop what we think is the most robust assessment of how many patients who meet X and Y criteria come through in a given week. We even get as granular as looking at like what times of day do those types of patients tend to present to the department, so that we can be extremely transparent in saying, like based off of our previous metrics, our previous success with this type of a study, we think we can maybe enroll 2 participants per week or 15 participants per week. So I would say it's really a collaborative conversation where we just try to be extremely transparent about what we think is manageable. And then we solicit some feedback from the partner about like, what do they need? What is their timeline? How do they want to consider progress monitoring? Like how frequently should we be looking at the data together? And then, like I said before, we really pull in perspectives from the clinical partners so that we're sure that we're kind of optimized and not, like missing some critical moment or opportunity that would really swing the rapidity of the enrollments like one way or the other. So I hope that answers the question. It's really study dependent though, as I'm sure you can imagine. Shannon said, these seem like highly complex research processes. Thank you for being so diligent. Oh, Shannon, you're so sweet. You must have a very connected coordinator culture to make that work. So I would say, because I'm hoping there are some people on the call who are thinking to themselves like, oh my gosh, I might like to go be a research coordinator in the emergency department, and we'd love to know about you. But yeah, I mean, this is a team that's chatting and connecting with each other through the day, into the evening hours, over the weekend hours, because we really do want everyone to feel remarkably supported. As with many research coordinator programs, there is some degree of turnover. And so we usually have at least one team member in training. And because this is an environment where so very many very odd things can happen. We have intentionally designed some communication systems like Lex described so that folks can get answers that they're looking for. We spend a lot of time as a team just debriefing on things. We have that incredibly strong leadership structure. So we have faculty who are kind of on call all the time that we can circle back to with questions or confusions. So I'm not sure that with the amount of time we have left, I can say much more than that, except that we really consider our culture and we try to really plan intentionally for everyone to feel supported. And that's partly a safety issue too, right? Like this environment is actually dangerous in some ways. And so we need to make plans for people to feel safe and supported. All right, I am scrolling here, and Anne asks, do you ever provide research coordination services to studies that are not recruiting out of the ED, such as studies of inpatients or those recently discharged without an ED admission? So yes, we can definitely support. We can support through coordination services, or we can support with protocol consultations. I think our group does a really nice job of using a lot of the HealthLink services that are available. And we do have a really strong data analyst program in the department too that we can loop into conversations and support colleagues. So definitely interested to help across the School of Medicine. Oh, Cecilia. Oh, thank you, Helena, for responding to Cecilia about the QR code not working. We're sorry about that. Okay, so we do have a couple more minutes if there are lingering questions. Otherwise, my email address, I'll just put it right back up here. We are very, oh, pardon?
Could you say a little bit about how you work as a team to accomplish your publication load, and what that looks like? Do you have faculty that have time where they can get away to do that, or what does that look like as a team?
That's a great question, and I think it's a really good opportunity for us to clarify too. So when we say that there have been more than 50 studies, peer-reviewed studies published as a result of EDRC services, what we really mean is that we have supported a number of studies or trials, and the PIs and study teams for those studies and trials have gone on to publish about their data and their findings. So we kind of like to say that, and this maybe is a little aggressive of a statement, but I will stand by it. We like to say, right, that those publications would not have been possible without our services, because you don't get to findings without data collection, and that's where we support. So does that help clarify a smidge?
Yeah, thank you.
That's a great question. Cecilia, does UW's ED tend to be the lead coordinating site for multi-site trials, or are we typically just a participating site? Yes, typically we're just a participating site. To be the lead coordinating site would be a new frontier for us, and I think we have enthusiasm about that. But that would be a new adventure.
Phoebe, I just wanted to say that, like in terms of team building,
Ooh.
I would say that both you and Lex also provide a lot of opportunity for gathering and paying attention to all of us as individuals, and do a really good job of making sure that we all know how important we are to the team and that our participation is important. And you also put a lot of effort into making sure everything is going well because it's such a volatile sort of situation. You both do a really excellent job. So I don't think you mentioned that, and I just want to say that I think that's a really important part of team building that you both contribute.
Thank you so much for that comment, Jenny. Yeah, I mean, I think this might be true more broadly of emergency medicine, but it really takes an amount of interconnectedness and really just valuing each other to make this work because it is complicated.
Any other questions from anyone for Phoebe and team?
You can find us through email. Yeah, we'd love to chat with anybody who has other questions about the program in general, or who maybe has a recruitment need that could be addressed via the ED. So please reach out. We'd love to hear from anyone.
Thank you so much. Very nice hearing all your impressive work. There's some wonderful comments in the chat for you all.